around the world in different countries, there's a lot of discussion going on about reconfiguring the regulatory regime, regulatory model. The British have their format where you have the Bank of England, the FSA, you've got the Australians with a different model, you've got the Chinese with institutional model, as the Financial Stability Board calls it. Do you see regulatory reform as an important part of creating a more stable financial system globally in going forward?
Yes, regulatory reform is certainly part of it, but also international cooperation, because if we end up with too many and quite different regulatory systems, that wouldn't be good. But having said that, though, it's not a simple task to figure out what, in some sense, the optimal regulatory system would look like, and that's also something that actually changes over time.
Is the Swedish model something that you would recommend generally?
No, not necessarily. I mean, one needs to be mindful of the fact that here we're talking about slow-moving matters. In our case, the FSA has been an independent authority for, I think, about more than 100 years. And then that's what we are used to. In many other countries, in many other places, they have actually chosen to have supervision located inside the central bank. So there's not a given answer. You can organize these things in an efficient way, in many different ways, and that's likely to vary from country to country.
Given the different institutional forms in the different countries, to what extent would you say personalities play an important role in bringing life to the models that exist? Without really mentioning any one jurisdiction with any problems, but how would you say personalities give life to the Swedish model?
Well, personalities do play a role in
to work
in the sense that if you know the people around you, it's probably easier to do the work compared to if you don't know them at all. But having said that, at the same time, I do think that it's very, very important when one organizes financial systems, not to organize them around individual persons. Systems are supposed to last for a long time, and they are supposed to, in good cases, to be put together in such a way that they are not dependent on individuals.
Right, but in some cases of failure, you get a case where the central bank is doing what it's supposed to be doing, the FSA is doing what it's supposed to be doing, but the systemic risk that results is because of the ball falling between the two.
That is true, and this is really the hard part of it. On the one hand, to organize the whole system in such a way on the public sector side that you have clearly defined roles, that the individuals involved fully understand who has the right to decide what, when, and why. And if you happen to have many different bodies, which is actually the case in many countries, then you need to have a clear framework within which these bodies are supposed to cooperate. Because clearly, if they don't cooperate at all, then something is likely to fall in between the cracks.
Right. Ms. Ingves, you are a big proponent of regulatory regimes cooperating on a regional basis, and I think that the history of the Baltic region, just prior to the current crisis in Greece and Ireland, as an example of that. What is your thinking in terms of what needs to happen for regulators across countries, especially in connected economies? To what extent do they need to develop a working model in terms of talking with each other?
Well, the issue is kind of the following, and I'm not talking about it from a sort of an EU, the European in a European context, but the reflections are sort of fairly general. Within Europe, we have been in favor of a free market for financial services, including cross-border banking. That means that you can grow your bank into any size, shape, and form, including the cross-border aspects of it. Now, at the same time, the regulatory frameworks and the supervisory frameworks have basically stayed national. And that that in my view creates an imbalance between the private sector and the public sector. Because once you get substantial cross-border banking, then if you have a problem, it just won't work to have the supervisors just doing their thing at the national level. They have to move with the banks and with the markets at a pace which is similar to what the banks do themselves. But that's difficult to do, because to get to that point, you have to cooperate and you have to see a bit of sovereignty and pass that on to cross-border institutions.
But at the same time, you collect lots of data on the related economies, on the institutions of these economies and so on. Give us a sense of your worldview when you were looking at this data. I'm trying to draw from you the wealth of experience that you gained.
Okay, let me use the Baltic countries as an example. The Baltic countries, in terms of sort of the banking sector, in the three Baltic countries, the banking sector is dominated by Swedish banks, more or less. Market shares vary a bit, but more or less. Now, in this situation, we were sitting in Stockholm, really worried about what was going on in these three countries. But we just did not have the tools, because to stop it, that had to be handled at the national level in each individual country. We were talking about it, and we were warning about it, and we were talking and warning louder and louder, but still the whole thing fell apart and created some serious difficulties in these three countries. Clearly, it would have been better if we had had more cross-country cooperation in such a way that these countries had taken measures in their own countries in order to make sure that this accident that happened hopefully could have been avoided.
But did you personally have to have a sense of what you needed to look for, or were you also on a learning curve as the crisis was?
Well, we were sort of on the learning curve when it comes to keeping track of what's going on abroad. I mean, we had our problems in the 90s, and that was essentially basically a domestic problem. It becomes more difficult when you start thinking hard about what's going on in another country. And then it, of course, also gets more difficult to get the right information that you need. And then you need to cooperate, and you need to do the stress testing, and you need to do it cross-border and all the rest.
Are there parallels between what's happening in Greece today and what happened in the Nordic countries 2 years ago?
No, not really. One parallel is what has been going on in Latvia, because Latvia is a country with some serious difficulties, and they have a fixed exchange rate against the euro, and they have had a serious fiscal problem. What's going on in Greece is basically a very difficult situation on the fiscal side, and that does not hold at all when it comes to the Nordic countries. The Nordic countries, we have had all sorts of fiscal problems in the past, but this time around we look pretty good compared to many others.
Final question: what is your sense of the role of markets in the resolution of bank risk management? The markets are being beaten up for being, mercenary and all that, basically. But the role of derivatives, the role of the market being a risk management mechanism for banks.
But to say markets are to some extent the risk mechanism for banks. You need to be aware of the fact that sometimes markets function the worst when you need them the most. And if you are not aware of that, then you can run into some serious difficulties, and you need to be aware of that. That's how sometimes that's how it goes.
Mr. Ingves, so little time to discuss so much that you've personally learned over the years. I hope to be able to interview you again sometime. Thank you very much.
Thank you.